Hey guys, Sign here with HobbiesofaMan once again, and today I think we're going to start a new video series on the channel. It's going to be called Book Chatter. It's just going to be me kind of giving extra thoughts that maybe I didn't mention in a video or that I want to talk about that have come up over the time that I've been doing stuff that doesn't necessarily relate to a specific, volume or specific part of a story, right? But it does, interact with a certain book that I've reviewed on the channel, right? So we're gonna start with The Wandering Inn. There's a lot of things that I kind of have wanted to say, and the problem is that it's basically been 3 months since I started reading The Wandering Inn, and every time that I have a thought, I forget to write it down, right? And so if I don't mention it in my reviews, it's pretty unlikely that I'll remember it. But I did manage to write some of them down, and I do have some different kind of topics that we can go through here to talk about that maybe or maybe not will be interesting to you guys, right? So hopefully this works out. I don't know. If you guys are interested in specific topics or ideas or things that you might want me to expand on, please feel free to let me know down in the comments, and I'll try to make a video about it, or at least write it down so I can put it in the next book chatter segment, or whatever the case may be. So today we're talking about The Wandering Inn, and for the sake of clarity and for the sake of not spoiling people unnecessarily, I do want to talk about everything up to the end of volume 3. I have started reading volume 4. I am like halfway through through book 5 right now, but I will try my best to avoid talking about the topics that come up in that book. So if you're afraid of any even slightly mild potential spoilers, you might want to click away. If you're not really too worried, I think that you can probably continue on from here, right? So first I want to talk about things that I kind of neglected or didn't mention or didn't kind of give enough attention to, or that I have seen in comments that I think is better to expand on right now, right? So the first one is that in volume 3, TOREN dies, and I didn't mention that at all, right? And the thing is that I didn't mention it because as of the end of volume 3, I don't think that it was actually clear that he died, and it also wasn't that important to me. I don't really have too much of an interest in TOREN as a character. I mean, I did in some sense, right? Because the idea of TOREN is really cool. It's basically a robot, right? And ERIN was using it as a tool without realizing that it was also a person, right? Or close enough to a person to have interest and feelings and ideas. And it's because, well, kind of similar to the ANTINIUM, you just can't really communicate properly, right? Like to the ANTINIUM soldiers, right? And so in that sense, I do like some things about TOREN, right? Because I think in the modern era, in the time that we live in now, where AI is growing, where we might have semi-sentient robots, on the horizon, something like TOREN is quite, valuable to kind of look at and think about, and how does this actually work, right? And I'm interested in that sense, right? But as a character, I don't think TOREN is that deep or interesting. Like the character is mostly just kind of reacting, right? It's kind of like in the burgeoning sense of self, right? Like he hasn't really identified who he is yet, hasn't solidified that matrix of personality yet, and so he's kind of like just existing and figuring out, okay, I can think, okay, what do I think about, okay, what am I doing, okay, why do I dislike why ERIN tells me things, okay, why do I like this person but not that person, do I care about ERIN, do I not care about her, all of these thoughts are interesting, but they're things that as a human, as a person that has existed, you kind of don't remember doing as a child, right? And so from that sense, it might be interesting, but it's also kind of boring because this like self-actualization, this self-realization of reality is so basic to, existence that we kind of really don't think about it, right? And so I find myself bored with like that kind of idea, right? Like that kind of explanation or that kind of exploration of TOREN's character, right? There are some elements that are interesting, right? Like the fact that TOREN is kind of malicious, right? But is he malicious because he comes from a darker type of magic? And is he really even from dark magic, right? Because we know that these like taboo classes exist, right? Like the Wendigo thing from that the florist was afflicted with. And Pisces does not have one of these skills. At least I don't think so. Or doesn't have one of these negative classes, right? At least I don't think he does. And so he's able to pursue necromancy positively, and so is Askerash and the Goblin and stuff. So is necromancy inherently like evil, right? And I guess the answer is no. However, it's understandable that, you know, living creatures might have this like visceral reaction to it because you are desecrating, you know, the dead. And also it's like this uncanny valley thing, right? Where you're just like, this is not human, but it looks human. Or this is not living, but it looks living. And that's like really fucking creepy, right? But so Toren's maliciousness is like, is it because he's like a burgeoning singularity of thought? Like, is it because inherently creatures with intelligence are malicious? And then through socialization, they learn not to be, right? Or is it because he's just like bad? Like whatever it is that went into creating him was tinted with this like personality of malice, right? So that kind of element is interesting, but I don't like Toren as a character. I like kind of the stuff that he represents, right? And so I didn't really talk about it, but I think I should have, because I might not care about Toren, but I love ERIN, right? And the fact that she felt so bad about killing Toren, and not realizing, you know, oh, this guy was alive the whole time, and I was treating him like a toy, or like a tool, not even like a pet. Like, she wasn't nice to him. She was just kind of like expecting him to follow, right? She was treating him like a robot, right? Like the way you or I might treat Siri, or, you know, Watson or Google Assistant, right? With basically apathy. Or interest, but not necessarily niceties, right? And then she realizes, oh, he was a person. Oh, I was mistreating him. Oh, he killed a bunch of people. Like, all of these things compound into this horrible, like malaise that ERIN feels, right? And so I thought it was a really powerful moment, but it wasn't one that particularly interested me, right? So that's why I didn't mention it initially. However, I think that it was wrong of me not to mention it, right? Because it really is like a really powerful moment for ERIN, right? Maybe like the second or third powerful moment, right? Like the first powerful moment is when she feels safety at the end. The second powerful moment is when Caleb dies the first time and she unlocks the immortal moment. The next time, I would argue, is probably when Toren dies, right? You know, you can argue that there's some elements beforehand. There's another special moment for ERIN, but I can't really remember what it is right now. Something in volume 2 that she does, right? So volume 1 is safety at the end. Caleb dies. She beats up Ghazi, although that isn't really a special moment for ERIN specifically. Krisha, like, not talking to her anymore isn't really that powerful, right? I feel like there's another moment before Toren dies that is like one of, you know, the top moments of ERIN in terms of like her personality shifting or growing in the in-world, right? But either way, the point is that it is a powerful moment. I should have talked about it, and I didn't, and so I want to mention it now. Otherwise, I want to mention the reaction that people seem to have quite often about ERIN being upset about killing, right? And also how that doesn't really like work for me. Like, it's tough to kind of talk about volume 1 sometimes, because I just got into the Wandering Inn and I basically read the newest version of volume 1, right? Which I thought was rewritten so that it could be published properly. And it actually doesn't seem to be the case, right? I thought that there was a physical edition of this that had been put up on Kickstarter or something, And apparently that is not true. I don't know where I saw a physical edition, a hardcover edition of The Wandering Inn. Maybe I dreamt about it, but I could have sworn that I saw, you know, like the same like type of cover as like something like Mother of Learning has, right? Like those physical editions that Wraithmark Creative and what's the other one? The group that works with Daniel Green, right? Like I could have sworn one of those people, The Broken Binding, I guess, did a physical edition of The Wandering Inn, right? And I thought that that's why the volume was rewritten. And so it's hard for me to talk about volume 1 sometimes because I'm reading the newest version, the best written version, right? And the vast majority of people that watch these videos read the original version or listened to the audiobook, where ERIN is significantly more annoying. At least my understanding of it is because of the way Andrea Persnu does the voice for ERIN. She comes off as a really whiny girl, right? And in the book, in the version that I read, the modern version that's up on the web serial now, ERIN doesn't come off as a whiny person. She comes off as someone that's dealing with the fact that her whole world got turned around. She has no clue what the fuck's going on, and then she's been like basically almost murdered like for 2 weeks straight, right? Like as she was running from Teriarch's cave down to the inn, right? And ERIN is not really a whiny character in my opinion. And then once she settles in, and then she has to fight the goblins and kills the Hob, the chief of Rags' tribe, and has like this horrible reaction to it, I think is completely realistic. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that reaction. I think it's actually much more true to reality, right? Like you and I, and maybe most people, even if we live in the US, probably have not really held guns or swords or had to kill anything bigger than a bug, right? And I mentioned this in volume 1, in my volume 1 review. Killing bugs is not really the same as killing like mammals or like larger animals, right? Honestly, maybe even killing fish is not that big of a deal. I mean, if you go fishing, which I have, you kind of have to deal with the fact that, oh yeah, this is dead, right? And, or it's in the process of dying as soon as I catch it, right? Which is not really that big of a deal, right? But if you look at a larger animal, something with fur, and then you kill it, I feel like there is a certain level of like emotional sickness that you feel at that thought, right? I wouldn't know. I've never actually, you know, killed an animal like that, but I can clearly, I find the idea that I would have a negative reaction to it to be very plausible, right? And if ERIN is killing something that not only is humanoid, but also deeply intelligent in the same way that she might be, something that she recognizes as, you're like me, but you're not like me, and I can't reason with you, and the only thing I can do is kill you, and then she has to do so, it makes complete sense that she would kind of basically break emotionally or physically or mentally or however you want to mention it, and that she would want to not kill anyone, right? Now, is it a bit naive that she's like, we're not killing goblins, fuck you, anyone that does this is bad? Maybe, but not necessarily, because the way that everything is explained to us, goblins are only the way they are because that is the only niche in society that they can basically fit into, right? And this goes back to my idea that it's the reality of having a stone-based society at the same time as this like medieval, almost Renaissance type society interacting at the same time and place, right? Like the goblins just don't have access to resources, and they don't have physical strength the same way that all the other races have. And so they're left at this like barbaric horde mentality that makes them that way, right? And then they stay that way because people treat them as monsters when they're clearly intelligent beings, right? And so even though it's kind of naive in the sense that ERIN needs to protect herself and she's going to have to fight them, at the same time, I think that it's immensely commendable that she's like, no, these people are intelligent. We cannot kill them just because we think they're a nuisance, right? Like that is very clearly like a meaningful idea. I don't really understand why people dislike this concept so much, that ERIN wants to protect other sentient life, right? And so I really appreciate that Pirate Abba did this for ERIN, for this character, that she made her kill something, made her have a horrible reaction to it, which most real life humans would probably have if we got isekai'd and then we had to kill a little green child with like sharp teeth, right? Like it'd be scary as fuck and also immensely debilitating emotionally. And then she gets this like, she doesn't become a murder hobo like every other lit RPG or fantasy, isekai protagonist does, right? Because like if you read Japanese light novels, characters try to have a moral high ground initially, and then as soon as they're like, oh crap, I'm powerful, they like become assholes, right? And if you read lit RPG and all of that stuff, those characters are basically assholes already, and then the fact that they gain power in these lit RPG worlds just makes them even worse, right? And so I really appreciate ERIN not being like that, right? And I just don't understand why people like get so upset about it. I think it's just because they want the power fantasy. ERIN actually reacting like a real person would do is not, fulfilling to their power fantasy, and so they get angry about it because they were expecting something that wasn't given to them. And I can understand that perspective, but it's just like, dude, then move on from the story and stop complaining about it, right? Like, I don't know. There's like a billion other books that you can read that have what you want out of them. Why do you have to waste your time complaining about, ERIN's character? I don't know. It just, I don't know. So that's that thing, right? And then recently, Sam Harrison, who is a small but growing British booktube channel, is doing weekly chapter reviews, right, of The Wandering Inn. He's going through Volume 1 at the moment. He recently read chapter 1.48R, which is the RYOKA chapter, the moment which kind of solidified who RYOKA is as a character, and then immediately broke her down in order to change her into a better character, right? And this is when I started liking RYOKA. Like, I hated her up to this point, and then afterwards, she grew on me, right? And Sam Harrison was quite upset about this. He didn't like this chapter because RYOKA was his favorite character. He liked the type of character she was, and he thought that this was out of character. And I'm not really sure why he thought that. He didn't really go into, he did go into it a lot. I just think that it wasn't like from my perspective, it was more like I couldn't interpret what I read of RYOKA up to that point the same way that he could. And it might be an age thing, right? Sam Harrison is older than me. I'm much closer to being a teenager than he was, or than he is, right? I don't necessarily know our age difference, but I'm 24, so, I was a teenager 5 years ago, and I was the same age as RYOKA 5 years ago, whereas Sam Harrison maybe has like 10 years of difference, right? And so that time difference might be kind of why our interpretations of the character are slightly different, right? To me, RYOKA reminds me of who I was 5 years ago, someone that I don't really want to be again. And to Sam Harrison, it might be that RYOKA was this fun, interesting, like, character that they might want to talk to every once in a while, that just kind of has this, like, ridiculous, youthful energy that, you kind of lose as you get older, right? And to me, RYOKA going crazy in chapter 1.48 and just kind of like trying to beat everyone up made total sense. Like it was logical. It made sense. It was the conclusion to her character based on everything that we knew, right? She has a chip on her shoulder. She hates her parents. She doesn't have friends. She can't talk to people. She has weird, crazy egotism and also like problems with herself and authority and all this type of stuff. She had her foot broken and she hates, politics and all of these other things that basically are completely encapsulated by the leaders of this adventuring guild, right? They're political powerhouses. They're parental figures to other characters. Not necessarily directly parental figures, but like they're in charge. And so there's a certain level of like parentalness that comes with that sort of idea. They're powerful, they're political, they're organized. They basically everything that RYOKA dislikes and that she has grown to dislike even more throughout this stay in the inverse is codified or, symbolized by Ibelith, right? And so when she's fed up. She decides to fight Eveleth and tries to take her seriously. And she gets mad that, you know, she gets beat, right? And there's also this, like, commendable but also rather ridiculous idea that RYOKA doesn't want to take advantage of the system that is in place in this world, right? I still understand why. Like, even up to volume 4, it hasn't really been all that important. Like, it was important initially, and she, you know, mentions every time that she meets someone new, and like, I don't have skills, I don't need them. And it's always like, okay, cool. Why? It's kind of useless. Like, you can still, you know, learn things without having to use those skills. You can just cancel those, but you could still be a runner, right? You could still have running skills if you wanted to, and it wouldn't really be a problem. And so to me, the way that this situation in this chapter works was correct. Like, I didn't like RYOKA up to this point because I didn't like the character. Like, it was a well-done character that I didn't like, right? And it made sense that this character was like this. And it made sense that they would do this, right? And so, it was like, this is well-written. And I think Sam Harrison was like, this is badly written. Because like, there's like dissonance between what he thought of the character and what the character did in his mind, right? Whereas for me, both of those aligned properly. And so, I was happy to dislike the character because I felt like that was the point that Pirate Apple was trying to make, right? Because after this is when we really kind of go and make RYOKA a likable person, right? She grows as a person from this. She realizes what she did. She tries to change. She saves a child. She goes to ERIN. She makes friends with her. She solves her problems with Saria. Like, all of these things eventually work out, right? But there is this catalyst that needs to happen. And as someone that kind of basically thought he was hot shit, got into university, failed immediately, and realized that he wasn't hot shit, this is exactly what RYOKA is going through right now, right? She thought she was badass, even though she had a lot of problems, and she got into the inverse, immediately was shown that she was not badass, and then had to get angry at the world. And then when the world smacked her down, she was like, okay, now I can change, right? And I think that is exactly what the RYOKA character arc is. And I think it's well written. And so I didn't like RYOKA up to this point, but she grows up as a character to be quite enjoyable, right? At this point, I want to listen to RYOKA's plot points, and I want to see where she's going, and I really love her as a character, especially with Eveleth, you know, as a catalyst for her and Mersha, right? So, yeah, I don't know. Is there any other topic that I have written down? The Antinium. I really like them. I think that they're really, really cool. I think that the concept of bug people is not necessarily super special, but I don't think I've actually seen anyone implement it, right? Like not in the way that in any of the books I've read, right? Usually when you have like bug humanoids or like bug people, they're usually like aliens, and they're usually bad, and they don't want to actually interact with people. They just kind of want to kill them. And so the Antinium are quite cool. One, I like that they remind me of like Bug's Life characters, right? Like something about the way that they're described and the way that I've seen fan art of them. It just reminds me of Bug's Life. And Bug's Life was one of my favorite movies growing up, so that's cool. Also, the idea of these characters, right? That there's one person in the whole hive that is real, you know, that's Queen. There are a few others that might be at that same level, you know, the prognators, or the prognators, whatever, you know, Kalabakos and Kissenber's level. And then everyone else is just a robot. They have the ability to think and be individual, but it's just never been a thing that was necessary, right? Especially like with the understanding that somehow moving away from rear de-evolved the Antinium, right? Made them less than they used to be. And then when ERIN starts changing things for the Antinium, when she makes Pawn, you know, realize his humanity, let's call it, his Antiniumness, his Antiniumini, Antinumity. I thought it was great. And how that grows and changes, and how these characters are suddenly dealing with the fact that, oh, I can no longer effectively communicate with Progenitor Kalabako because I have to talk to him like a person, not like a subordinate, right? Or they realize that they're having emotions that they've never felt before, or they feel boredom, or they feel these things that they've never felt before, and they're both appalled and immensely interested in what it is that they're feeling, right? Like, these moments and these concepts and these ideas are great, right? And you can ask me, like, why do you like this but not TOREN? And it's because I mean, they're ultimately kind of the same idea, right? But the thing is that TOREN is a slow evolution from no consciousness to consciousness, right? Whereas the Antinium is more like, you always had this ability, but you have to unlock it first. And ERIN is this catalyst that makes them do so, right? And so it's not really the same thing. It's a bit different in my opinion. And it's a way more interesting concept. And also the fact that not every Antinium wakes up into their consciousness the same way, right? Like Pawn and Bird and Belgrade and Aniad and, you know, Gary and all of these other characters are all individual differently, right? They kind of awoke at the same, like in the same way and concept, but they're not actually the same, right? Somehow, you know, a very minute difference in anything that they experience made them develop different personalities, right? And it's kind of hard to tell up until volume 4, right? Like, once you get to volume 4, you kind of can tell much better, but it's really interesting. I really like these characters, and their backstory is good. You know, all of the mystery surrounding them is good. When you get the other Antinium from other hives, it's really cool as well. Although I'm still upset that ERIN hasn't really said anything about CERN at all. I think the Antinium are probably conceptually my favorite part of the Wandering End. Just like, it's a new race that I've never seen before. They're very intensely interesting. There's so many things that tie into them, right? Like, can you classify their society as a communist society that is slowly awakening to a non-communist kind of, you know, system? Are they a religious society with a very specific focus that are awakening to the fact that it doesn't have to be that way? Like, how do you classify their society? Is there even a society if there's only two people that can actually think and talk to each other, right? And how does this actually work, and how did they evolve, and why did they do this? And, you know, how does this tie into their backstory and how they left rear and braved something that they could not overcome, like crossing the ocean, right? Because bugs and specifically Antinium can't swim. And is there a way for them to overcome this, right? Like, technically, bugs and lobsters are kind of the same type of animal, right? So is there a way for Antinium to develop aquatic versions of themselves based on the fact that they are, you know, this type of animal, right? Or based on this type of animal, right? Like, technically, a scorpion and a lobster are pretty closely related, right? I think that's how it works. I'm pretty sure, you know, shrimp and lobsters and crabs are all like aquatic bug, you know, type of animals, right? They're different because they came earlier, right? Basically, but I'm pretty sure they kind of fall in the same arthropod kind of like thing, right? And so if the Antinium are arthropods, right, is there a way for them to develop aquatic versions of themselves? And how would they go about that, right? Like, that is a really cool concept to me, right? So I don't know. Those are kind of big plot points here. Otherwise, I had some other kind of things I wanted to talk about. One, I wanted to talk about stories that are similar. You know, if you're reading The Wandering End and you want to take a break from it, but you don't want to necessarily escape The Wandering End, like what can you read that's kind of similar, right? Like, and similar in what way, right? So I have a few kind of suggestions here. First of all is Funa, F-U-A-N, all caps. She's, or they, I think she, is a Japanese light novel author, and they have 3 big series released in English. The first one is Saving 80,000 Gold to Retire in This Fantasy World. The second one is Didn't I Tell You to Make My Abilities Average? And the third one is I Shall Survive Using Only Potions, right? So those 3 are different stories, and they all have the same kind of idea. This kind of loser girl somehow dies, gets reincarnated, and then becomes this chaotic force of good in the world now that they are in this fantasy setting, right? And that is very similar to ERIN, right? However, these characters are kind of different, right? So I don't know much about the character in 80,000 Gold, but the character in Abilities Average is very much like ERIN, right? She's this like crazy person that kind of does things before thinking and kind of causes people to have these really weird opinions about them, but ultimately end up doing things for the better, right? So if you like ERIN specifically, I think you'll probably like Didn't I Ask You to Make My Abilities Average, right? And then for I Shall Survive Using Potions, the character, there's a lot more taciturn and a lot more RYOKA-esque. She's not necessarily this like chip on her shoulder, badass, runner, warrior type character like RYOKA, but she does have that same kind of like dislike of the world, this kind of certain distrust for things, and this idea that she wants to hide from this world as much as she can, right? But like ERIN, she ends up kind of not being able to do this very well. But if you like RYOKA more than ERIN, I think you should read I Shall Survive Using Potions. And if you like ERIN more, I think you should do Abilities Average, right? And then there's some other things that are similar, right? If you like, just like the idea of like a fantasy restaurant, probably Legend Lattes might be up to your standard, but the writing is quite different. It's a lot slower, and there's a lot more like mystery involved, right? Like you don't really know anything about the characters and like at all for the first like 100 pages, at least from what I've read. And that's kind of part of the appeal, right? Like it doesn't really matter. You just kind of want to experience this fantasy coffee shop, right? So that might be an interesting kind of idea. If you want something a little bit more ridiculous, a little bit less, you know, simple, but also kind of in the same kind of like slow, relaxed kind of vibe, maybe something like I've Been Killing Slimes for 3,000 years and maxed out my level. That might be better. In that one, the character is this girl that becomes a witch in another world, and then she basically just accidentally maxes out her level, and suddenly she's this really powerful character that's immortal, and she's kind of just existed with this small group of people, and then suddenly things happen, and she kind of has to get embroiled in these weird, crazy shenanigans with dragons and with slimes and all sorts of stuff, and it's quite cute and enjoyable, right? Otherwise, if you like the way that the Wandering In is just like kind of fucked up sometimes, maybe something like the Shield Hero. Although it's quite different, and I have a lot of problems with Shield Hero, right? But I think that there's certain similarities between, you know, how ERIN has to fight the goblin, and then some of the way that, you know, the goblins are kind of portrayed that is kind of similar to how Naofumi has to navigate the world in Shield Hero, right? That's a much more tenuous stretch, right? So I don't necessarily recommend you kind of go with this one. I think the first 3 or 4 recommendations were much better. Maybe Fierin, but Fierin is quite different. It's still relaxing and cozy in the same way that I find The Wandering In to be, but it's quite different because that's more of a cozy Lord of the Rings adventure, whereas The Wandering In is not really that. It's more like a crazy isekai adventure, right? So, I don't know. I guess I kind of fall short here, even though this was a topic I wanted to discuss. So maybe I'll talk about it in another, you know, Wandering In book chatter video if I come up with better ideas, right? Let's see. Did I have any other topics? I did have kind of this idea about talking about what I'd like to listen to when I read, but I'm not necessarily sure that that would be interesting to you guys. And it might be very specific to me because I listen to music in a lot of languages. You know, I speak Spanish fluently and I speak English fluently, so I listen to music in both of those languages. I like music in Italian because even though I don't necessarily understand all of it with my knowledge of Spanish, I understand you know, enough of it to like it. And I think that, you know, a lot of their like opera pop type stuff that Italy does is quite good. I like Spanish folk rock and folk metal. And I also enjoy listening to music in Turkish because I had classes about, you know, in Turkish when I was in high school, and then I went to Turkey a few times. So I like music in Turkish and French. I took French in university, and I'm not good at it. I'm quite bad at it, actually, but I really like French pop and French rap music. And so I kind of end up listening to all of these different things, right, at the same time while I read The Wandering Inn, and basically what I read while I read in general. And so I kind of associate these weird genres and kind of artists to different aspects of the story. And because it's so personal, I don't necessarily think that this would be a conversation topic that might interest you guys, right? So if you guys are interested in this topic, let me know down below, and I'll either give you an answer, you know, if you ask me, hey, what music were you talking about? And I'll tell you by character or by like story section, or I can just make a video about it, or a portion of the video next time I do another book chatter on The Wandering Inn would be about the music that I listen to while reading it, right? And I also thought about how do I incorporate The Wandering Inn into other interests that I like, right? I thought about doing a fountain pen video where I basically go through some of my fountain pen inks and try them and use them on a video, this kind of like ink exploration video idea that, you know, is pretty popular in the fountain pen community. And I use characters from The Wandering Inn, moments about these characters, kind of special quotes that I think about these characters to highlight these inks, right? So I thought that'd be interesting, but I don't necessarily want that to be a specific book chatter episode, like portion. I kind of want that to be its own separate video, right? So I don't know, I thought about that. I also thought about talking about The Wandering Inn and Pokemon, which is a weird connection, right? But like, if the Wandering Inn characters were Pokemon trainers, what Pokemon would they have, right? And you know, how would their team change over time, right? Like if I made a team for Caleb, right, or for RYOKA or for ERIN up to the end of Volume 3, would that team change later, right? Like, would it be different? And would it be cooler or worse or better? Would it be a meta, you know, viable team and stuff like that? I don't necessarily want to do all of the math and meta-analysis work that it would take for that part of the video, but I think it'd be fun to be like, okay, ERIN would have these Pokemon because of these elements of her storytelling, and RYOKA would have these other Pokemon because of these elements of their storytelling, and Caleb would just be a Pokemon, like a bug Pokemon trainer, and he'd have like, you know, King Gambit and Scyther and, you know, all of these weird, crazy, angry bug Pokemon. And Ralph would just have a bunch of Scraggies and Scrafties because he's annoying. and how would Pisces like, you know, certain ghost type Pokemon, right? Like, I think that would be a really fun, interesting idea, right? And like, how would the Wandering Inn react to Pokemon? Especially because there's elements that could be similar, right? Like, Lakin has his bird, which is like a fancy elemental bird of some kind. And Lionette has Aspis, the worm, right? So, you know, if Beast Tamer, Beast Trainer is a class, that means that there are Pokemon trainers in the Wandering Inn. How would they kind of be interested in Pokemon, right? Like, I think that would be a fun kind of thing. And it's mostly because, although I really loved Pokemon as a child, I don't actually play the games anymore. One, because I don't have a Switch, and two, because those games are quite repetitive, right? So I really loved Generation 4, you know, Diamond and Pearl and Platinum. And I played Heart Gold and Soul Silver, but I kind of didn't like Black and White that much. And then I kind of just stopped, right? But I still really enjoy watching like Pokemon content, right? Like I like watching news segments about, you know, how Pokemon is changing, what they're doing, and, you know, what the new game is going to be. And I was watching a lot of it, you know, a few weeks ago. So I thought that would be an interesting type of video to make. But again, these are like interesting videos to me, but I just don't think that they would work for other people. And I don't think that necessarily anyone would want to watch them, right? But it's because I don't think that the Wandering Inn community is really that, like, is to that level, right? And I think that's just because there's so much content, right? Like, it's the same idea as like the Wheel of Time. If you look at the Wheel of Time, most of the content is only about discussing the actual story, right? Instead of like making fan fiction and growing out the interest in the story and kind of doing theories and stuff like that. And I mean, mostly the theory thing is because the Wheel of Time has ended, right? But like, I feel like manga communities that have stories that are either finished or ongoing kind of have a lot more variety in the type of content that's made about them. And book communities have less, and especially book communities of a certain type, right? Like the Cosmere stuff is so broad and crazy because the Cosmere just has so much stuff going on, right? But the Wheel of Time is very specific on like, you know, book to show, book discussions, rereads, reading for the first time. Like those kind of are the core elements of the Wheel of Time community, and you know, kind of how everyone discusses it. And I feel like the Wandering In is the same kind of idea, right? I've not really seen too many discussions that are kind of like out of left field or kind of just ridiculous and funny or weird. And I kind of want to do some of those, but I just don't think that there's anyone that would be interested in them, right? So I don't know. Those are my thoughts for this video. This is the first book chatter. This will be a work in progress. I'm going to try to refine this idea a bit more going forward, but I think the concept in general is quite strong and good, right? It's just me talking about different topics that came up as I was reading The Wandering In that I didn't really discuss much, or that I've thought about since I read it, and I want to kind of dump them all right here instead of having to wait for another review, because it kind of stiffens the content a bit if I have to be like, okay, before I start the review, let me do all of these things first and tell you all of these things, right? But if I do it as a separate video, you can choose to interact with it or you can choose not to, right? And that's your prerogative. Feel free to do so or not, as you like. But I think this would be a fun type of video. I hope you guys enjoy it too. I hope that it works out. And I think I'll probably divide this in sections, and I'll just kind of label the sections different things so that you guys can browse them as you like. But hopefully this is interesting and you guys liked it. And if you did, please leave a like, subscribe, comment down below. Let me know what you thought. Let me know if I should continue making these, if I should kind of expand this idea specifically for The Wandering In to talk about other things, let me know down in the comments. And thank you guys very much for taking the time to watch this. I really do appreciate it. And see you guys later.